So why don't we get started? Perhaps others will be joining us later. We are delighted to have Dr. Raed Safadi give us a talk today on new economic challenges facing the Middle East in the Trump era. Dr. Safadi is the chief economist and partner at Whiteshield, which has offices all over the world, but he's based in Dubai, lucky him, and working a lot on issues related to public policy and for advising the government and other actors in the private sector, et cetera. Before his position there, he was the chief economist to the government of Dubai. And before that, he was at the OECD for about 15 years, which is where I met Raed. We used to work together in the Trade and Agricultural Directorate. Raed was deputy director of TAD, and before that was at the World Bank. So he has a tremendous amount of experience in international institutions, international organizations, advising the private sector, governments, et cetera. So he can give us some great, as well as being a very well-known academic, having published a lot in the area of international trade, international development, and even macroeconomics, et cetera. So he is uniquely qualified to come give a talk here at a place like SAIS. So welcome, Raed, and without further ado, let me hand the floor over to you.
Thank you so very much, Michael. It's a real pleasure to be back here. And I was reminded I was here 9 years ago in the same kind of setup. I don't remember what I spoke about then, but I'm sure it was different, especially now that we have a new wave of shocks and trends taking shape and taking place in the world economy that have a direct impact on not just the Middle East but the world over. And we will get a chance to talk about all of these things as I do the presentation. It is really fitting that I am here in Bologna at SAIS, right? A crossroads of ideas, civilizations, you name it, at a time when I look at the Middle East and I see it also at a crossroads. A crossroads, given all what is happening on the trade front, on the monetary policy front, on the technology front, and on the decarbonization front. So all of these things are happening at the same time. There's a trade fragmentation taking place. There's a decarbonization move. There is a desynchronization in monetary policy across the globe, right, in the major markets. And of course, we have the AI coming in, promising, that it will lift productivity so high, but it remains silent on what happens to my job, your job, the future. It remains silent. But we get to talk about all this. So, back in April, I don't know how much you follow international events and what happened. Anyone can tell me what happened on April 2025 of this year? Give me a title, just a title. What do we call this? Liberation Day tariffs on April 2025 that made trade anything but free, right? I mean, that's basically, what started it all, right? So without further ado, let's see, does it move? It worked, okay. It's behind me, I can't see it, right? So that was April. And then another event happened, which was the one big, beautiful bill. Why am I talking about this? These are, you think they're domestic policy moves. However, they have spillover effects across the globe. And we'll see how even a budget bill in the United States can impact, strategies, growth strategies, development strategies across the globe. We'll see. I need to see what's on the screen behind me just to make sure that it is what I wanted to exhibit. So I'm going to explore all these issues, but focus mainly on the Middle East, because that's the subject of my talk and where I want to. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. So as you can see, all these 4 mega trends. We talked about the trade disruptions. What happened? Trade was, we were living in a globalized world economy where trade was, being conducted according to rules of the game set by international organizations such as the WTO, right? Let's make this a conversation, right? So the World Trade Organization, right, was set up actually to have a fair what? Rules of the game for countries that trade with each other. So you cannot, we agree on a certain conduct, on certain behavior, and then when you stray away from those agreements, there are mechanisms where there are penalties, there are sanctions, and what have you, but all under the international law, where WTO members have negotiated those agreements, come to terms, and then agreed that okay, if you were to dump in my market, which means if you were to sell your products in my market below the cost, under with the objective of trying to capture market share, then I have recourse to what is called anti-dumping duties and so on and so forth. And if anything fails, then there's a dispute settlement mechanism in the WTO where I can take countries, right, to that dispute settlement, so to say, well, they did not respect the rules of the game and what have you. All that came to was challenged, in fact, on April this year, when unilaterally the United States announced Liberation Day tariffs under the pretext that the trade balance was inimical or did not reflect the U.S. What do I call it, right? I mean, the trade balance was against the United States. The trade balance in goods actually was a deficit. So they were deficit, which means they bought more goods from outside the United States that they sold to other countries. So that deficit, that reflects in the trade balance, the current administration said, that's not right. Other countries, they are not treating us fairly. And therefore, we're going to do it on a unilateral basis. And then hence the tariffs were announced under the pretext that I want to correct my trade imbalance with all the other countries, right? But of course, if you studied macroeconomics, you'll know that, the cause and effects are completely different. Why? Because, a trade balance reflects like, of a country reflects like your own trade balance, right? So if you save, if you eat or if you spend more than what you gain, you're in deficit, right? So, and that's exactly what a trade balance is. So I buy from you more than I sell to you, right? That is, I am a deficit with you. And therefore, this is what happened on the trade front. Then you have the shifting financial cycles. What is happening? Normally, in the financial cycles, there is a lot of coordination happening between the major central banks of the world, right? Where, the Federal Reserve, picks up the phone, the chairman and the directors there, they talk to the chancellor of the Esquire the chancellor in the UK, they talk to the Bank of Japan, they talk to the president of the ECB to say, well, we're going to do this or we're not going to do that, and we're going to raise interest or what have you, so that there is no surprise in financial markets, so that there is no arbitrage that can happen, meaning, currency shifts overnight because one policy decision was taken by a major country that came as a surprise to another. That is no longer the case today. So the US started reducing its interest rate. Europe is now looking, the ECB is like, staying put. The Bank of England is also, watching carefully. And of course, Bank of Japan, Bank of China has been injecting liquidity into the market. So there is this asynchronicity in the financial markets, which we haven't seen before. So that's another shock. Trade and monetary now, meaning finance, right? And then, of course, this is happening at a time where we want to move to what? To a green economy. We've done the Paris agreements. We've been doing all these conference of parties. We are now at number 30, trying to reach our targets in terms of CO2 emissions and all that. So it is already ongoing. Some countries are gung-ho about it, and other countries now are, taking steps back. We'll get to talk about it. And then, of course, the AI that moved from the lab to our desks within the last few months, and it has affected a lot of things, including in my own business, what we do now, right? I was telling Professor Plummer that now we have a full team doing design, right? Design now that can be used, that you can use AI to design your slides and stuff. Don't worry, these slides, my design team designed them, right? It was not ChatGPT or what have you. But still, give it a few months, and then, the design team may be looking for, to reskill, to shift occupation, not just to shift, jobs, but to shift occupations, because that occupation will no longer be in demand, and that's the AI. So where does that, within those 4 mega trends we're talking about that are transforming the world economy, where does the Middle East sit? The Middle East, as you know it, well, you know it as an energy producer, energy exporter, right? So and now the energy is a bad thing because it's non-renewable. There's the green transition, and then it has to move away from exporting oil and gas into something more renewable, and therefore it has to transition. And they themselves, those exporting countries, have actually decided and took on obligations in the Paris agreements to actually reach zero CO2 emission by each country by different dates, and they're making the investments that are required to decarbonize and reach those targets, right? So the AI now revolution, how do they harness it? The decarbonization, it's very straightforward, right? And then the trade fragmentation. What does, if I tell you trade fragmentation, think about a world economy which was, based on rules of the game set by all the big guys, the small guys, and all countries in between. And all of a sudden that world trade order is no longer there. Let's talk about it. What do you think, if you were, like the Minister of Economic Development of country low income, called you and said, this is it. What do I do? We used to export bananas, and now these bananas are attracting tariffs of 20% in our largest market, right? What do I do now? The same thing, I get a phone call, from the Saudis and the UAE and Bahrain and all this, saying, we have all this oil, right? And now, we look at the EU-US trade, where the trade agreement, where the EU has agreed to buy $750 billion worth of oil, not from Saudi Arabia, but from the United States for the next 3 years, right? So I'm looking at a market, meaning, the decarbonization that I was planning on doing, incrementally as I move forward, I have to accelerate it now, right? Because I'm losing buyers. And if China gets hit with 100 and whatever percent tariffs in the United States, industrial production in China goes down, right? And what goes down with the industrial production in China? Consumption of energy, right? Consumption of energy, the industry is the single most, the highest user of energy, right? So if industrial production in China goes down, who is the number one exporter of energy resources to China? Saudi Arabia, not Iran. Iran is now on the sanction list, right? Leave it aside, otherwise you'll get us into all into trouble, right? So Saudi Arabia, right? So if industrial production in China, I mean, all forecasts are saying it is going to go down anywhere between 35 to 45%. So what does that mean in terms of their energy consumption? And of course, they have their own transition, China, right? So all of these things, and then these guys, they're asking you, this is happening, I was a good citizen. I was, I had my plans to decarbonize. I was investing in AI. I was investing also in reskilling my population, right? And I was building my industrial base, green manufacturing and all this. And now I am faced with all this because I needed the money coming from those oil resources, to actually do all those investments, whether in AI, cloud computing, or in the labor reskilling and all that. So what do you do now? What do you do? I don't know. Do you know? No, you tell me, throw at me any idea. First, understand that what we're having here, let me just finish this. What we're having here is not a cyclical shock. All of these, they're trends, meaning they're not going to go away, right? So a shock like, the COVID pandemic is a shock, cyclical, right? Comes and goes, right? So we adjust, we absorb the shock, and then we transform, meaning we learn some lessons, and we say, now, I want to invest more into this and that and the other, and then when you transform and what have you. But this is not a shock. This is a trend. These are 4 mega trends that will move your economy, right, from what you call a cyclical era into a structural thing. So tell me, what do I do? Excuse me? Okay, but this is it. But how? How? Because now, like before, China, other countries, Vietnam, Laos, most countries in Latin America, use trade as an engine to develop, to grow, and to develop and sell. But now trade, well, you see what's happening, meaning, barriers against the free flow of goods are now rising rather than falling, right? And therefore, please, the venue to develop, on the shoulders of a trade strategy is, at best risky today. Please. Services, fantastic. Services, then you think about it. But also, for your own country, what's your country, please? From the UK. Do you need more tourism in the UK, or financial sector flows and what have you? Indeed, because they have a Vision 2030. The Vision 2030 has so many components, including, of course, get this number, 100 million tourists by 2030, of which 55 million are going to be religious tourism and 45 are business. They're getting there, right? They're increasing capacities, airplane seats, hotels, roads, modes of transport, including trains, planes, automobiles, you name it, right? That's a good thing. So now I'm thinking services, and tourism is an export of services, right? But they're not just looking at services, at tourism. They're looking across all services activities. What other services activities would I want to now, tell another countries? Let's stay away from the UK. Where are you from, sir? Okay, so what other services sector you'd like to develop in Italy?
I'd focus more on industry.
Okay, industry. I'm with you. You tell me. I'm the minister of development in here, and I come asking for your help and support, ideas. What do I do?
From services, sorry, Italy has a lack of the financial services are lacking. Milan is the financial hub of Italy, but compared to Paris or London, it's very much underdeveloped. So yes, financial services.
Financial services. Okay, so that's a sector. Now, once I identify a sector, whatever sector, including financial sector, then I'm going to think, how are these mega trends affecting this sector that I have now declared as a strategic sector that will drive my growth? This is where you go beyond just the headline into the details. So let's investigate a bit. Financial sector. What is now a trend? I mean, we talked about the lack of synchronicity now across central banks so far, but what is now happening in the monetary world? You know, what is happening? Something called Bitcoin. I have heard about this. Anything that people are moving away from money, right? So there is this digital currencies, right? Now. But if everyone knows about it, what is then my comparative advantage as Italy, to try and capitalize on this trend and actually make it a driver of my financial sector growth and maturity, right? So this is the kind of thinking that you want to always think about. So fine and dandy, no matter what you think about, the US, the one big beautiful bill, right, wrong, or whatever, or the Liberation Day tariffs, right, wrong, or welcome or not welcome, irrelevant. For you, what is important is to say, all right, I want to see its implications, and I want to go all the way down to the nitty-gritty and then the policy, because the policy will define at the end of the day, whether you succeed in riding these waves or in falling behind. At the end of the day, as I said, and I repeat it again and again, this is a structural transformation. It's not cyclical. They're here to stay. They're not going to go away, right? Okay, tell me.
Maybe a geopolitical response, the path of Abramo.
I didn't get that.
The geopolitical response, the path of Abramo, Israele, Arabia Saudita, Stati Uniti.
The Abraham Accord. How would that, I'm with you, how would that actually move things forward? How would, like if Saudi Arabia were to strike a deal with Israel on, to join the Abraham Accord, right? That's your question? How would that actually solve Saudi Arabia's economic development challenges within these things? What would they do, please?
One way I can think of, if the trade fragmentation is here to stay, and I agree with you, then you need to regionalize your trade, which will happen only if.
Thank you very much. So maybe this is one answer to your question, meaning, within the region, now that we're thinking about it. I don't know to what extent you've heard in the aftermath, and even before, right? Before from the 2018, because this episode of tariffs and China and what have you didn't start this year. It started back in from the first Trump, and then continued under Biden, and it's still and now it has escalated, and of course with all the other ingredients, the monetary and the AI coming in, and right. So you think about it. How does the regionalization now help, or what if Saudi Arabia were to join the Abraham Accord? You've heard about the friendshoring, nearshoring. What does that mean? Friendshoring and nearshoring. Very simply, we were moving, like before 2025, the world was globalized, and then investment decisions and trade decisions were based on efficiency. So, Apple went to China, set up shop. Chinese firms went to Vietnam, set up shop, you name it. So, global supply chains were integrated. Investments, followed efficiency, where it's most efficient. Da, 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 da. And then things started going bad in terms of, those investments going outside my country. And then there was a tsunami sometime, in Asia, and then disruption in value in the supply chain. That led some countries to say, well, I'm going to go a bit into nearshoring of some of these activities that I have offshored far away, right? So that was just a risk management tool at that time. Then came the entire beggar thy neighbor, if you will, policy, whereby I say, I look at my trade balance. I don't like being in deficits. Someone is taking advantage of us. I'm going to change it. And therefore now, this nearshoring, I'm going to go into friendshoring. What does friendshoring means? It's like, I'm going to redirect my investments to countries that I consider to be my friends, and that these are the trends. Now, I go back to your Abraham Accord. If the regional approach to the trade fragmentation is a solution, right? How does Saudi joining the Abraham Accord will actually make for a new engine or a new tool for growth within the region, be it for Israel, be it for Saudi Arabia, right? So this is when I quibble, so I push further and further to understand. Okay, so what?
Another thing is the Silk Road or the Cotton Road, India, Israel, Europe.
Okay, then a new let's call it the new Silk Road or Silk Road 2.0, which is already established now. As you see all these trends, and I will get to that eventually, maybe today, right? The Gulf is playing a very strategic role in connecting, right, markets, whether in Asia, east to west, and south to north, right? So as they're playing the connector role, right? Whether that route, now with trains, also with pipelines, and all this goes through Israel, or what will be based on efficiency, right, rather than geopolitics, right? Maybe it will be a price for peace. Who knows? That instead of the pipelines and the train routes going, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Europe, it goes Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Israel, Egypt, and then goes into to Europe, right? I mean, I don't know, right? So, but this is something that we need to push. In my job, in what we do in terms of the policy is that any policy that you come up with, you have to push it. I work with very, very important people who have ideas, right? So whenever they throw these ideas at me, my first thing, is I push them and say, okay, fantastic, bravo. So how do we do this? And then, I get the intervention and then try to relay it to the outcome. And how do I measure the outcome and stuff? And then, if I'm convinced, he'll hire me and I'll sit down and I develop the entire journey, right? So this is where now, the Middle East and the GCC countries find themselves. And they are now moving from a passive resource provider that are reliant only on resource exports into an active flow orchestrator. And we'll get to know, to talk about that. Flow of what? Guess with me. Goods, big deal. Services, big deal. What is the biggest flow today that every country wants to have, big part of it, please? People also, yeah, let's put aside, but think about another one. Data. Data is now the new currency of competitiveness, right? I mean, data. Who gets to do what with data, where that data actually is located, how that data travels from point A to point B, how that data crosses borders from country A to country B, right? Who governs this? What are the rules and what have you? And then we'll get to speak about that, right? And I don't want anyone to confuse anyone. I mean, I don't want to put the Middle East as one monolithic groups of countries. You have the oil exporters and you have the oil importers. The oil exporters, they have the comparative advantage in oil. The oil importers, they have, who said people? The talent, right? They have people. So they have people and innovation, right? So this is where, you think about it, it's like there is complementarity in this game, within a region. So the region that has hit here to depended on Western markets, for its imports, export, and whatever, now they can actually work together, and this is exactly what they're doing, to overcome this fragmentation and on the foundation that, your labor and talent intensive countries such as Egypt, Morocco, and I'm resource intensive, and therefore there is a complementarity between the two. So let's play ball. Does that make sense? Does it? I mean, please disagree with me. Well, agree with me. Agree with me. It's safer for you. It's really safer. But just challenge me. Am I talking nonsense here? Am I convincing you of the two facts? Retain two facts now. The first fact is that these mega trends that we talked about are not cyclical; they're structural, and therefore you need to do something about them. You cannot treat them as a passing wave of changes. They are here to stay with us. Then the next best thing, if I'm focusing on the Middle East, I say, all right, I'm no longer exporter of oil because also already, I have a decarbonization plan. But now that decarbonization plan has been thrown out the window because, the demand for oil, is shrinking. So I have to accelerate my other transitions, the transitions to the non-oil. And how do I do this? At the time when there is trade fragmentation, when there is an AI revolution, right? As we said, the AI jumped from the lab to the market practically within months, and disturbing labor markets where resilience, testing resilience across all the labor markets that we can think of. Retain those ideas, and then we'll come back to them. Right. Uh-oh, sorry. It went twice. All right. So we talked about it. We talked about trade policy what is this? It's now I'm seeing it. Okay. Trade policy, as we said, it was. I'll give you an example. It was a boring thing, getting into negotiating trade policies, rules of origin, all these transactions things, the paperwork and all this. All of a sudden now they're, front page news. Aren't they? Have you read about them? Have you heard the term dual use? Are you aware of export restrictions? Terms that were, for Michael and myself, we're accustomed to them, not just, from a academic research, but also from a policy perspective. But all of a sudden, these became, policy-related issues at the highest level. What is a dual use? A product that can be used, to manufacture a car or to manufacture a bomb. That's a dual use product. So there's a list, and that list is getting longer and longer of products that cannot cross border from one country to another because, you know, the potential of their dual use for other things. This is one. Rules of origins were established to say, well, you know, if two countries were in a regional trade agreements, I agree that I will consider the products of US origin if it has 40% domestic content, which means I've sourced most of my inputs or my salaries or whatever at the level of 40% from the US market, and automatically that product is said made in the United States. And those rules were accepted. Everyone was playing by the rules and stuff. And all of a sudden, now those rules are no longer applied. And why is that? Because China is being targeted so that, you know, I'm working with Saudis, with UAE that want to be friends with everyone, but then that have a lot of parts and components coming from China being assembled in Saudi Arabia or in the UAE or in the region and then exported either to the EU or to the United States. Now the exporters in those countries have to worry about two things. The first thing is that they have to worry about, you know, the Chinese content of those final goods. And the second thing is the carbon content of those goods when they go to Europe. What has happened in Europe as of June of this year? Have you heard of the CBAM? It's not BAM BAM, CBAM. Do you know what a CBAM is? CBAM is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism that the EU introduced this year in June 2026. It says, and rightly so, in their drive towards greener economy, they imposed on their own industries CO2 targets. And therefore, you know, that added cost to their domestic industries. Now, foreign industries, you know, that are exporting to the EU will gain comparative advantage if you do not countervail those costs at the border. What they did is that they introduced those tariffs on certain commodities so that to neutralize the effect of their domestic regulations and, you know, to reestablish a level playing field between their domestic industry and the foreign industries that is exporting. All of these things are happening as we speak, right? Am I going to CBAM? What is CBAM? I just forgot. Carbon Border Mechanism, CBAM. In EU, which is one market, you know, they have a common external trade policy, right? So all EU countries, you know, have at any point of entry, they have instituted the CBAMs. Now, to navigate the trade fragmentations, of course, there are winners and losers. And, you know, to be part of the winner, you need the policy. You can't just be inactive or, you know, passive. You have to actually come in. And thank God, otherwise I'll be out of a job, right? I mean, I'll be home. Or maybe that's a good thing at the end, you know. I've had a long career. But hey, the winners now, you know, think about all these trends. Amongst them is the connectivity, the connectors, and the AI business. How you can harness AI for logistics, for traceability. Remember, traceability now is an issue. I talked about rules of origin, not to tell you about rules of origin, but to tell you now that your exporters are gonna, you know, be wary about the origins of parts and components if they come from countries that attract high tariffs in the United States. So traceability is a key aspect in the trade, in the export business now. Traceability of the minutia of any parts and components that goes into your iPhone, your computer, and stuff. So is that a job for man or woman or what have you? It's a job for digital traceability, right? This is AI. This is intelligence, right? So you need to harness that power. Thank God it's there. You can harness it so that you have the traceability, right? What do I write here? I write the regulatory clarity. Why do I say regulatory clarity and credibility? What do businesses, when they invest, need first and foremost? What has happened after the Liberation Day tariff announcements? Tariffs up, tariffs down, bilateral this, bilateral that, Vietnam gets that, and investors, we're running and saying, settle on one page on something, so that we know what to do, right? If policy keeps changing every day, there's no clarity. That's regulation, right? So if I invest $10 today, I invested based on a certain regulatory environment that I know, that I've studied, that I know how to behave and how to, navigate, not, a changing regulatory environment. And this is an important one, so that you want to establish clarity and credibility. So transparent rules of the game, clear, transparent of the game, and predictable rules of the game, that do not change, from one day to another to the next. AI and agility, as we said, the monetary policy now, right? So I'm going to use AI to actually forecast inflation, to do all the things that I used to do manually, right? And I need to be agile, right? Look at the policy decisions at the Federal Reserve. We all read about it, in the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times and all this. Everyone watches the one word out of the Fed chairman, conversation, whether he is in Washington or he's in what was it when he was at that place in Jackson Hole, right? So every word he says, people are watching and stuff. I don't watch it anymore. I let ChatGPT tell me, seriously, right? And then I have the presence of mind to actually, analyze whether this makes sense or what. The policymakers now, they need to harness, especially now that we have lack of synchronicity across financial markets, right? So I want to avoid this arbitrage. The arbitrage is what? Is that, all of a sudden, people dump euros, buy dollars because of the interest rate differential or perceptions of interest rate differentials, right? And therefore, all this will create instability. And I want to harness all this to see, all the information, how do I act in real time? I now, the AI gives you the ability to do a nowcasting. Have you heard this term, nowcasting? Nowcasting. LLM, you've heard LLM? Large language models? Large language models say what? Say, what happened in the past will happen in the future. So if I dump gazillion observations in a system, on a digital computer, and then they try to see cause and effect and relationship of, movement of cars, movement of people, internet traffic, nighttime lights, satellite imaging, and all this, put it all together, estimate GDP. Frankly, those large language models are able to forecast GDP up to 92% accuracy. So those of you who are studying to be statisticians, forget about it. Seriously, 92% accuracy today. Tomorrow, meaning what? They look at all the behavior, all the outcomes of the past, all the numbers, whether you talk about consumption of rice, consumption of X, consumption of this, traffic, nighttime, consumption of electricity, all of this, and establish relationships. In economic theory, they may not have anything to do, right? And then they build a model, a forecasting model that tells you, GDP today, based on all these observations the last 40 years that I've looked into, GDP should be at plus 3%, at plus 2.9% today. I don't have to wait 6 months for an estimate that I know is just an estimate that will be revised either upward or downward, 3 months down the road. And more than that, it gives you what? It gives you estimates of GRP. You heard this GRP thing? Gross regional product. Meaning, I want to know what Bologna produces in any one quarter. Now I can do it. I don't need surveys. I need the satellites imaging for the last 20 years. I need all the internet traffic, right? I don't need anything. In fact, the system has it already, right? They can do it. The only thing that I need to add, and another layer, is the satellite imaging, which you need to buy from EADS, right? So they can give you satellite imaging every week, every day. They can give it to you by the hour if you want. They just take those photos and send them to you. So all this to say is, you need that agility. And please, ma'am.
Years ago, we had the head of the World Bank mentioned the ability to North Africa come and actually talk about data paucity on economic indicators in North Africa. So basically, they're relying on the numbers that governments are giving them, and they know that they're not right. Like accuracy-wise, they know that they're not accurate. So I'm curious what the benchmark for the 92% accuracy is here, and if the implication of what you're saying with the data that you can input into these models is that it's actually getting more true to life numbers for GDP or GRP. What's the implication for the government numbers and how they can think how they're doing for the gap between the two?
Absolutely. So how do we know that they got to 92% accuracy? Is because we compared the estimates the last 20 years that the model produced with the actual that happened, right? On the GDP, 92%. Now, on the unemployment, that's a different game. However, in the unemployment, suffice it for the model to establish an elasticity relationship between employment and GDP that is historical, that will tell you today, right? Now, if your historical numbers are wrong on the employment front, and they're not detailed enough to say, gender issues, skill levels, and what have you, then your model will not be able to produce those things, right? On the GDP, 92%. On the employment, I am with you 100%, right? And I say it, and this is what I say to all the people I'm engaging with, right? On the employment level, I'll give it to you, but be mindful that these were based in terms of accuracy on past historical behavior. So if I establish an elasticity of employment to GDP, of 2.1, 2.2%, that is historical, right? I cannot verify this if the historical numbers are wrong. But I'm going to use those in order to do a nowcasting, right? And as I move forward with the nowcasting, I'm learning, and not me, I mean, the machine is learning faster than I am, right? And therefore it adjusts. Eventually, give it 2 to 3 years period, and it will reflect, the actual numbers of employment, unemployment, the gender, the skills. Now, governments in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, and all this, they have all the details. We have now the details in terms of employment, nationality, skill level, gender, a number of years of employment, the salaries they get, everything we have, right? It's not because everyone, whether expats or local, they have to have those cards, and everything is linked together. So we have the accurate figures on the employment, and there are targets there that we follow, and we report on a quarterly basis, and then we feed into the LLMs so that the LLM learns as we move forward, and then eventually we don't need even to look into the databases or to carry out surveys and whatever. We need the LLM to tell us, what's happening, right? So in the case of the monetary policy, I'm going to harness and use AI, you know, to do the nowcasting, the forecasting. What's going to happen to inflation? What is happening to growth? What's happening to unemployment? All of these things, all of this information, Federal Reserve, ECB, you name it, they rely on survey data, you know, that sometimes come in a bit too late. That's why their reaction, whether to raise or to decrease interest rate, comes in, you know, too late, too slow, too high, too low, whatever, you know, all this criticism. But now, you know, we need to harness that power to do all these nowcasting, forecasting, and what have you, right? So for the Middle East, you know, they're doing that, by the way. You know, SAMA, the Central Bank of the UAE, they're doing that. They're using the AI and all these LLMs to actually see where action in the economy is going. And however, you know, do you know that the currencies in the GCC countries are pegged to the dollar? What does that mean, pegged to the dollar? Pegged to the dollar meaning, you know, there is a constant relationship between the value of the domestic currency to the dollar. That doesn't change. What does that imply? That countries that peg their currencies to an external currency lose their sovereignty over monetary policy, which means I import whatever interest rate or policy rate is in the currency that I'm pegged against. So if the Federal Reserve raises its interest rate, I automatically in Saudi Arabia raise the interest rate on the Riyal. If I don't do that, what happens? Think about it. The return on your US dollars goes from 4% to 5% on a saving account, and they stay at 4% in Riyal. What do? You convert your Riyals to the US dollars, and then you earn 5%. This is called arbitrage, right? So once it is pegged, meaning you're not taking any risk on the exchange rate, automatically the price of that money, whether it's US dollar or Saudi Riyal or UAE dirham, should be what? Risk fixed and risk free. And therefore, any interest on the US dollar will have to be exactly the same as the interest on those domestically pegged currencies, right? So what does that mean? The US reduces interest rate because of domestic policy, domestic conditions. They don't care about the conditions in Saudi Arabia or in the UAE or any country that has pegged their currency to the dollars, and rightly so. Why should they, right? It was a sovereign decision by Saudi to peg their currency to the dollar, so I reduce the interest rate, right? Saudi Arabia reduces its interest rate on the Riyal, automatically their debt services goes down, but anyone can help me out here? Asset prices, what happens to asset prices? They go up. I may be injecting bubbles, right? Because there was no reason. I mean, if there was any reason to raise interest rates in Saudi Arabia, the SAMA, Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority, would have acted, right? But now, an external, you know, change forced them to do the change in their market, and therefore they have to be wary of the consequences of those changes on, you know, their debt services. Absolutely, they will be paying less, fine and dandy, but then there will be a lot of liquidity, right? And then it will be that will cause an asset bubble. Why is that of a concern? Remember the 2008 and 9 crisis, you know, and the bubble in the real estate market, and that will happen there. So all of these things, you know, I show them here, and now resilience redefined. It's 10 minutes, right? Okay. So basically, you know, for countries, you know, my advice and the work I'm doing in the Middle East is to actually help those countries. First, I sell them this agenda, I convince them that this is the agenda, what you see on behind me, right, is what needs to be done. And this is what they're doing. Each of these countries, is one way or another on this path. First, I want to create new rents, and I'm really using those words very, very appropriately. Rents from rules. I'm developing, the rules of the game. So if I say, I'm in the GCC, I'm friends with everyone. So I'm friends with China, I'm friends with the United States. I'm friends with Europe, I'm friends with Turkey, I'm friends with everyone, right? So I'm defining myself a new role for me as a connector, right? Come with your data, locate it here. It's protected. Here are the rules of the game. I'm writing them, right? And then by writing them credible, clear, fair rules of the game, you extract what? Rent, meaning you get economic activity, you create economic activity where there was none. This is why the first and foremost, I'm saying I'm moving from oil rents to rules rent, right? Remember, every shock brings in a challenge. Your job in a policy, in an international relations, in engagement is what? What is your job? Is to say, okay, I got punched, and I'm just gonna put some medicine on it, or I'm gonna see how does that punch actually, what opportunities that punch that I just took will bring about. That is the job that for international relations and people working on economics. What are the opportunities? And here lies the opportunity. This is my job. I've been doing it for 30 years now. So I tell them I want to now extract trends from rules, right? Rules what? Rules governing data, right? Data location, data security, data transferability, data, all of this, right? There are opportunities there, but of course I have the money. I need to create the clouds. I need to create the space. And who knows what kind of space is being created in the UAE and Saudi Arabia? Do you have an idea? Cloud space. The second largest cloud computing in the world is now being built in the UAE and the Emirates of Abu Dhabi. Second to what? To the one in the United States. Billions of dollars are being spent there. What do you think? Just so that they store data? They store, analyze, and do everything with data. So it's not sun, it's not wind, it's not oil that they have comparative advantage. Now they will have comparative advantage in the data. And to do that, they have to elaborate the rules of the game that are credible, and rules of the game that say, everyone is my friend. I'm not taking, sides with the Chinese or with the Americans or with the EU. Everyone has their own thing, and I have my own that tries to aggregate across all these, protect your interest, and I'm just here, to do business. I don't have a special thing, right? So the infrastructure fusion in here, whether you talk about ports, finance, and digital corridors with AI regulations. Now think about it. I talked about rules of origin. I talked about traceability. Imagine countries that exposure now. One exporter, if in your country sends a merchandise that has a chip that has a dual use, and all of a sudden that country gets on the gray list or the blacklist of the US or EU. Because there was, one exporter can do this, right? Therefore, you need the traceability. And if I establish, an AI system that does the traceability, that does the regulation, that does in all of it in a transparent credible, predictable manner, then I'm attracting business. And that's what's happening. I have the physical ports, I have the physical cloud computing capacity, right? I'm fusing all this infrastructure and I'm just telling business, come over, and I'm increasing the capacity. Why? Because, I know that there will be more business to come into the future. Of course, but by building all this capacity, the physical capacity, you need human resources. I still think, even though machines now are growing, getting smarter, right? We as workers, we need to get smarter. Certainly, the machines will speed ahead of us, but at the end of the day, we need to have a human capital that is driving that true growth. It is the human capital at the end, and this is where the investment should go, right? And then, we know that AI is disrupting. But now, what's my role in here? As I said, it's an opportunity. I go to AI and say, I want to predict and forecast the skills, the occupations of the future. I use AI to do that, and I, as a government, I'm going to, try to orient my education system and my skills development and my vocational training towards those occupations and those skills of the future rather than the past, Okay, so here we go. I'm here at your disposal. I hope that you guys have had enough of me and my shouting. I could. Thank you.
I think probably the most surprising thing from this that we can gather from this presentation is that actually something good could come out of Georgetown University. So,
My alma mater. Okay.
okay, anyway, thanks so much for sharing these insights, Raed. I mean, in a succinct way, I mean, taking these major structural trends that we see of fragmented trade. And it's interesting that how the evolution of that term, because it used to be fragmented trade was used in the context of supply chains. And now it's about a global trading system that is being cut up and sliced and diced, if you will. So, how does the EU, how does the Middle East deal with that, combined with disruptive AI, the energy transition, and shifting financial flows? And this is kind of a major challenge, as you pointed out, that is facing not just the Middle East, but all economies. And so, thanks for that, going through these things. If I could just use my prerogative as chair to ask a couple of questions. It's interesting to see that there's a Saudi Vision 2030, because we have a Vision 2030 here at SICE as well, which is, I don't know. Sorry? And yeah, but I don't know if our lawyers could make it a bigger deal if we came up with it first.
Yeah.
Who knows? Anyway, you've got this trend, of course, as you mentioned, with these transitions, and fossil fuels are becoming going to be less important in the future, particularly since renewable energy is distributed more equally across the world, right? And so that you don't have this big trend, so you've got this big challenge as to how to diversify. And it seems to me that these GCC countries they're facing these same challenges and everything. And I'm just wondering to what degree you're seeing a cohesive approach between countries, if they're coordinating their diversification strategies, or if they're sort of going it alone, with UAE going its way and Saudi going its other way.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Great question. There are coalitions within the region being built, not across the board, but on issues, certain issues. Rather than try to do everything in one go and in one basket, they're going at it, where interests converge. Give you an example. So there is the GCC, like the idea of a common market across the GCC, which has happened, so a Saudi is treated the same as an Emirati in the UAE, as a Bahraini in the, so there is equal treatment, national treatment in terms of business, establishment, no residency and all this, like in Europe, right? Now, when it comes to the trading part, let's start with trading. Some countries were frustrated with the GCC common external trade policy that hasn't moved fast enough. They've been negotiating, for example, with the EU for the last 20 years, a free trade agreement that has not materialized. They've been negotiating with Singapore, also the GCC, it hasn't materialized. So the UAE said, went to its brothers and sisters and said, listen, I'm going to do it alone. But I'm not doing a free trade agreement, I'm going to do what is called CPAs. CPAs, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreements. Nice term, huh? CPA, right? So they struck CPAs with Israel. They struck a CPA with India. They the UAE, that is, right? And with Turkey and with Chile, they've done this because of their frustration that, the secretariat of the GCC wasn't moving fast enough to bring those negotiations into a concluding there. But that was done, in the open, so they didn't do it under the table and stuff. And they stayed away from discriminatory trade policies, right? So they did an economic partnership, they deepened the economic side. And the trade side, they kept it along the lines of the common external trade policy of the GCC. On this one, yes. Now, on the AI business, there's a huge competition, right? And the winners take it all. I don't know, we'll see. There's, Masdar has on Stargate in Abu Dhabi, as I said, is investing billions to create this cloud computing in Abu Dhabi, the second largest in the world. They were able to have access to NVIDIA chips, right? Saudi Arabia is building something similar, but at lower scale. And it doesn't have those ambitions in the data connectivity business as the UAE. Yeah, but they see eye to eye and they negotiate. There is a joint UAE Saudi Business Council that meets, and then they talk about, they invite each other so that, sovereign even can, sovereign money from Saudi can invest in UAE and vice versa. And that's the spirit. So it is not that to say, well, we're going to go all GCC countries in one go and try to hash out all our differences in one agreement. We go segment by segment, and that's what's happening.
So why don't we open it up to the floor? Please, say your name and where you're from. Yes.
Hello, sir. My name's Jason Guth. I'm from Alaska in the United States. Isn't it counterintuitive or counterintuitive to use AI to forecast and predict economic data when it's AI itself is driving such a massive bubble at least in the American stock market, with almost like a new .com bubble? And given the energy demands that much AI computing requires, wouldn't it also require us to fall back on fossil fuels to power all of it?
Well, I mean, the bubble you're talking about, it's in the stock pricing business, right? I mean, in terms of the digital, if you look at the S&P 500 and where it's at now at record levels and what have you, right? Now, using AI, it's not counterintuitive, because it's not just you're using AI, you're building intelligent models that actually draw on past historic behavior, that was seen in the market and translated into economic output, call it GDP, call it GNP, whatever you want to call it, right? And then through iteration and learning, it created a model. So it is not like, every time it actually hallucinates and produces new numbers. It's a model that has been tested for the last 20 years. I mean, they tested throughout the 20 years to get to the 92%, right? And then applied. However, that model is dynamic, Because, once the real numbers, the actual numbers, the observed numbers, the survey data there come in, the AI revisits the model to see, where they've erred and where they've struck correctly. You see, so it keeps on learning. It is not a static model. Any CGE that we build, man, it's like, it's CGE, dynamic or not dynamic, computable general equilibrium, sorry, models, right? This thing is learning as we speak, observing new data, contrasting it with the actual official data, and seeing where the divergence, and then coming up with its own estimates or forecast. Now, why I say it, you use it to do inflation, because this is real time. I'm not saying, you're going to hit it spot on, but I'm no longer in the speculative world. I can actually interpret whether it's hallucinating or not. Whether it tells me that the CPI now is, there's upward pressure owing to volatile, let's say, oil prices. I'll disregard this, but it has learned already that core CPI versus CPI, for example, consumer price index. Sorry, right, and core inflation, and non-core inflation. So it also analyzes the construction permits, for example, right, that have taken place in the first and the second and third quarter in 2025 in your own city, and compares it historically, and can actually, based on the model, says there's a growth of 2%, there's a growth of minus 5%. And then you can actually query it and say demand for cement, demand for steel, all of this. You see the logic, and it keeps learning. So I do not agree with you. I am of the view that this thing, I need to harness it, right? And I need to actually abuse of it, and I have to keep teaching it.
Thank you. No, a few points. So I might say I'm less interested in the AI predictable capabilities. I thought about it regarding actually yesterday with Dr. Meyer on intelligence analysis, and I'm not really of the view of the abuse it part. It has a lot of problems, but I wanted to ask you about two things. The first one is on the idea of the GCC, I'm friends with everyone, idea or strategy, and how long it can last in a world where, for instance, the great power, the United States, that has secured this country, actually more than secured, invented and allowed them to exist. First Great Britain, but then the United States, really. When great powers pass they tend to go from likability to effectiveness, and that's, I think, their phase in. And if they would allow Qatar, the UAE, also Saudi Arabia to have this policy without having for themselves some sort of preferential treatment. And so if that would essentially crumble this strategy of being friends with everyone. And then I wanted to ask you a question about this country, Italy. You know that the greatest glory of this country were in a period where a commercial exchange went from Asia to Europe. And then something happened, the transatlantic trade, and the country was essentially cut off. And now, for the first time since essentially the 15th century, again, the largest part of trade in world trade is between Asia and Europe, and not Europe and America. And so I wanted to ask you a question about what role can Italy play in this as a connector country between essentially East and Europe. And I'll finish now. By saying that in the end, it's interesting how in the end Europe it's the end goal of all of this. It was mentioned about the Chinese plan of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's interesting that the entire plan is to sell goods to Europe. not the other way around. But the Belt and Road starts in China and ends in Europe, and this middle corridor of the Middle East that you're talking about, it's essentially between India and Europe, China and Europe, and the Middle East playing the role of door, but the end of the road seems to be Europe in the end of the day.
Yeah, let me draw one conclusion from that last statement you made. If I believe what you just said, automatically I think, I'd say that the European officials are stupid, right? Because if it is true that, the Belt and Road initiatives is just for China to sell its products to Europe, then why did the Europeans allow it? My friend, it's a way, the trade is a wave that lifts all boats unequally, maybe, right? China exports in order to import. They don't export just to, for the heck of it, because they need imports. They need to import energy. So they need access to foreign exchange. They need to import also sometimes talent. They need to import a lot of raw materials, whether they're in Africa. They need to import what? Food. Food, my friend. How would they do that if they don't export? So their export is in order to import. And they will be exporting and importing from the EU. So the EU will be exporting to China. I mean, look what's happening now. They're going through Kazakhstan, right? At extra cost. There are trains leaving China on a daily basis with merchandise going to Europe, right? The Europeans, they love it. The Chinese, they love it. Both parties are happy, right? So it isn't that one is taking advantage of the other. Excuse me?
I didn't say that. I said that Europe, it's at the end, I said just that Europe seems to be the end goal of these Chinese goods as the market, because that's the market.
Also as imports, because a train goes from China to Europe, it doesn't come back empty. Otherwise, the costs will be prohibitive. So it goes with one set of merchandise, it comes back with another set, right? So it's a two-way trade, exports and imports. Both countries are better off than without that. So this one is put it aside. I don't know what you meant by saying, allowed them to exist, whether UK or the Britain or the United States allowed the GCC countries to exist. These countries exist, whether US or UK, allows them or don't allow them. The Saudi Arabia, 35 million people. The UAE is 10 million people and all this. And they're sovereign nations. They have their sovereign policy making at the economic front, at the political front, and at the security. Now, how they're managing to be friends with everyone? They say, all right, as I said, NVIDIA chips that are prohibited to go to China, they're now coming into the UAE. Why? Because the US is now sure and certain that there is a wall between those chips and the systems that are connected to China computing capacities, right? So there's a wall, meaning I've created a regulatory system that is clear, trustworthy, and credible, right? That I'm able to actually use these chips that are prohibited from going to China, that I'm using them here, right? And the Chinese firms do not have access to them. So everyone is happy. The US made a sale, NVIDIA made profits, and these guys are creating cloud computing in the UAE, right? Separating security issues from, the non-security issues. Rules of the game.
We have time for at least one more question. Yeah.
On Italy. Italy within the context of the EU. First, Italy doesn't, the trade policy is within the remit of the European Commission. The one critical thing that I would say, just being an observer, I didn't study the Italian economy. Right? Here, the red tape and the transaction cost, make it pretty difficult, if I don't want to say more than difficult, for foreign investors, including European investors, from investing in Italy in whatever sector, where, you know, either they create a comparative advantage or Italy has a comparative advantage. The transaction costs now, I mean, countries are falling over each other to make the business establishment process, the licensing, the operation, all this seamless. New Zealand, you are anywhere in the world, New Zealand actually will issue you a license within 5 minutes online. If you're sitting in Bologna or sitting in Washington, D.C., you know, you apply for a business license in New Zealand, pop, beep, you get it. I don't know, any one of you tried to, you know, get a business license in Italy?
It is more complicated.
What has been your experience? Yeah. And this is for normal business. I mean, let alone for big strategic investments, right? Where you go through the red tape and then, you know, the geopolitics and all this, da-da-da. And that, why am I saying this without studying the economy? Because I see your rank in the FDI attraction is not where your economic standing should be. You should be much higher ranked in terms of attracting foreign investment than it is the case. So I infer, I don't have evidence, I infer that there are barriers, insurmountable barriers, or, you know, not in absolute terms, relative to other destination locations, right? Relative to other locations, you're not competitive in terms of attracting businesses. And when you attract businesses, watch that space, retaining businesses.
When I see these trends, I see also some side effects. Like when you talk about energy transition, we see these disadvantages for energy producers, energy producer countries in the Middle East. But also, I see that this AI technologies expansion require well, electricity and also critical minerals. That this again could be a source of comparative advantages for Middle Eastern countries. So how do you see it? Do you see it like, well, it's a new game again for Middle Eastern, or?
It's not a new game, it's a continuing game, right? I mean, Saudi Arabia has a lot of mineral deposits, including lithium and nickel, right? I mean, the ingredients that are necessary for the green transition and what have you, right? But at the same time, they're friends with China. So, you know, you look at the export controls that China has instituted on rare earth and other critical minerals, right? They're targeted, not against Saudis and stuff. And most importantly, Chinese investors are already in Saudi Arabia and in the UAE establishing industries and manufacturing green, you know, and the green and electric vehicles and all this. So access in, you know, for these countries to those critical minerals that are needed for, you know, semiconductors, EV batteries, you name it, they have it. Whereas now, today, actually, you know, yesterday, China issued a policy whereby foreign firms, even established in China, will need an export license to have access to those raw materials, right? Even if they access them and use them in the domestic market, you know, to produce goods. And that does not apply to, you know, the Chinese investors in countries such as Saudi Arabia. Now there are EV companies being built in Saudi Arabia, right? Established Japanese and Korean car manufacturing are now looking within the region, entire region, to establish manufacturing hubs. And not only, you know, I mean, I just said Saudi Arabia, 35 million, the UAE, 10 million. That's, you know, altogether 45 million. Those companies are looking to establish there, not just for the domestic production, but to export those cars across the globe. And how is that? Because the logistics, the ports, the connectivity is already there, right? Whether by sea, by air, and what have you, and now by rail. It's happening within the next 1 year. You know, all these countries will have their own trains fast, you know, for merchandise transport. So it is a credible, if you will, package that where risks are minimized. So, you know, I don't establish a semiconductor industry, you know, of a manufacturing plant, and then all of a sudden I don't have access to some raw material that I need to produce the EVs or what have you. You see? So you have to have it all tied together. Hence the strategy that started to say, well, I'm friends with everyone. And that is my bottom line, right? I mean, you see it happening. They're friends with China without, you know, disturbing, you know, their relationship with the US, with the UK and all this, because investments are two-way streets. Those countries have invested in the UK and the United States, and the United States and the UK have invested also in Saudi Arabia and in the UAE and all this. So the economic relationships is deep. Now China is coming in. There's a wall. There is a fictitious wall, if you will, that separates from security issues the digital technologies that come from China from those that come from the West. And that is the connectivity agenda that they're following.
I think we have time for one more quick question. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for coming to speak to us today and explaining economic theories in basic terms for some of us that don't come from an economics background. I just had two questions, which might be good for a conclusion anyway. The first was from a political perspective, what is kind of, in your opinion, the wider goal of doing all of this? The AI transition, the connectivity, the cloud, the data. Like, I understand that needing to switch from oil exports, but what would you say the Middle East, or maybe not to homogenize, the UAE and Saudi Arabia's like long-term goal is? Is it so that they can help all people in the Middle East live and survive and improve well-being, or maybe that just of a select few? What's your political perspective of the long-term goal of this?
Yeah.
And then I also wondered, on a personal level, if that's okay, what's your role that you play in all this and your personal vision or mission for the Middle East? Like, what do you want to happen from the things that you've mentioned today? Thank you.
Look at the per capita incomes in that part of the world, right? Per capita incomes are at, you know, amongst the highest in the world. So the first goal is not to be philanthropic and then, you know, spread the wealth and all this. Let's not go there. Think about it from a practical perspective, right? The relationship between the leadership and the population at large. Per capita income, you know, they go from $55,000 all the way to $110,000, right? So the expectations are that these, you know, not only will be maintained, even at an accelerated rate of growth of the local population, right? Because of all the incentives and stuff, they will be raised. So the quality of life there and the demands that will need to be met to raise the quality of life are there. And that's the goal. The goal of the Vision 2030, you know, maybe it started from the realization that, you know, we have taken on commitments on the green transition. And of course, the CO2, the climate change will impact those countries disproportionately much more than any other country. So it is in their best interest to exit out. And even if they're not exiting, you know, for their own, you know, climate, they're exiting because they realize the demand has a limit, right? And now they realize actually that the demand for energy, they thought that it will go, you know, in terms of incremental, you know, slow incremental change to 2015. Now it's the downward trend is accelerating, right? So they need to get out of this dependence, if you will, the oil rents, right? And, you know, here's the answer from my perspective, and this is the role I play. I play as an advisor in terms of, you know, coming up with ideas. They have their own ideas when they run them through me, exactly like we did here, right? I push them, right? So I take any idea that they put out, right? And then we say, all right, give me first order implication, second order implication. What if, until, you know, we get all convinced. The role I play, and, you know, is actually try to make sense even of a nonsensical policy, for example, right? Meaning there is a one policy. I'll give you an example, you know, the example of the COVID. I was the chief economist of the government of Dubai. We were faced with decisions that none of us wanted to face anyway. there was a trade-off between lives and livelihoods in terms of how much you close, when do you start opening, and when to open. We were running models to understand if we opened at 60%, what would be the impact on the health front and all that on a day-to-day basis, because the leadership wanted to know, I don't want to open early, I don't want to open late. We're taking a hit on a daily basis on the economic front, right? So we want to optimize on this one. See? And therefore, I see also, that I'm working with people that care about the welfare of their citizens. They want to ensure that the quality of life keeps increasing, that, access to free education, access to free health, right, remains the currency of the future generation. This is why you have they have their sovereign wealth fund that invest in intergenerational equity, right? So they behave on the basis of the permanent income hypothesis, and they ensure the intergenerational equity, meaning I'm not leaving my children with a debt here paid up, right? Like, I'm now an American. How much debt are we going to leave to our children, Michael? Some serious debt, right? These countries, no. I mean, this is the reality of it. So think about it this way, and that's my role. And when we do, for example, the deficit financing and all this, we look into all these numbers, what they mean, the debt repayments, at what levels, and then when we renegotiate those debt instruments and their maturity and all this, and then how we optimize, and always they have this intergenerational equity in their minds, right? So what happens to my children? I'm not leaving them with my bills for them to pay.
Okay, thanks so much, Raed. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I saw that there were still a few questions. Maybe you could come up afterwards and ask them of Dr. Safadi. And but in the meantime, let us just thank you for a very interesting presentation. Okay. Permanent income hypothesis. I haven't heard that.
Yeah. I thought, like I could use this because, I have some students of economics, right? What is the permanent income hypothesis theory?
I don't think people study it.
I tell you, do you spend today on the basis of